Microsoft Azure Administrator AZ-104 exam updated questions are the best material for you to prepare for the test well. 1. You have an Azure subscription that contains a user account named User1. You need to ensure that User1 can assign a policy to the tenant root management group. What should you do? A. Assign the owner role for the Azure subscription to User1, and then modify the default conditional access policies. B. Assign the owner role for the Azure subscription to User1, and then instruct User1 to configure access management for Azure resources. C. Assign the global administrator role to User1, and then instruct User1 to configure access management for Azure resources. D. Create a new management group and delegate User1 as the owner of the new management group. 2. You have an Azure subscription that contains a user named User1. You need to ensure that User1 can deploy virtual machines and manage virtual networks. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. Which role-based access control (RBAC) role should you assign to User1? A. Owner. B. Virtual machine contributor. C. Contributor. D. Virtual machine administrator login. 3. You plan to use the Azure Import, Export service to copy files to a storage account. Which two files should you create before you prepare the drives for the import job? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note: each correct selection is worth 1 point. A. An XML manifest file. B. A dataset CSV file. C. A JSON configuration file. D. A PowerShell PS1 file. E. A driveset CSV file. 4. You have a recovery service vault that you use to test backups. The test backups contain 2 protected virtual machines. You need to delete the recovery services vault. What should you do first? A. From the recovery service vault, delete the backup data. B. Modify the disaster recovery properties of each virtual machine. C. Modify the locks of each virtual machine. D. From the recovery service vault, stop the backup of each backup item. 5. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription1. You have 5 terabytes of data that you need to transfer to Subscription1. You plan to use an Azure Import, Export job. What can you use as the destination of the imported data? A. A virtual machine. B. An Azure Cosmos DB database. C. Azure File Storage. D. The Azure File Sync Storage Sync service. 6. You have an Azure Kubernetes service, AKS, cluster named AKS1. You need to configure cluster autoscaler for AKS1. Which 2 tools should you use? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note: each correct selection is worth 1 point. A. The kubecl command. B. The as-aks command. C. The set azvmcmdlet. D. The Azure portal. E. The set as-ax-cmdlet. 7. You have a public load balancer that balances ports 80 and 443 across 3 virtual machines. You need to direct all the Remote Desktop Protocol (RDP) connections to VM3 only. What should you configure? A. An inbound NAT rule. B. A new public load balancer for VM3 C. A front-end IP configuration. D. A load balancing rule. 8. You have an existing Azure subscription that contains 10 virtual machines. You need to monitor the latency between your on-premises network and the virtual machines. What should you use? A. Service map. B. Connection troubleshoot. C. Network performance monitor. D. Effective routes. 9. You are the global administrator for an Azure Active Directory, Azure AD tenant named adatum.com. From the Azure Active Directory blade, you assign the conditional access administrator role to a user named admin1. You need to ensure that admin1 has just-in-time access as a conditional access administrator. What should you do next? A. Enable Azure AD Multi-Factor Authentication, MFA. B. Set admin1 as eligible for the Privileged Role Administrator role. C. Set admin1 as eligible for the Conditional Access Administrator role. D. Enable Azure AD Identity Protection. 10. You are the global administrator for an Azure directory, Azure AD tenant named adatum.com. You need to enable two-step verification for Azure users. What should you do? A. Create a single sign-in risk policy in Azure AD Identity Protection. B. Enable Azure AD Privileged Identity Management. C. Create and configure the Identity Hub. D. Configure a security policy in Azure Security Center.